And I think I'm still learning this, is that we're so much more powerful than we realize. Tomorrow, next week, next month, I'll manifest something else that doesn't exist now. And yeah, we're just so much more powerful, I think, than we realize.
Welcome to the Expanded Podcast with your host, Lacey Phillips. As a leading manifestation advisor with a process that's, radically different from the old New Age model, mine is rooted in psychology, neuroscience, and my energetic gifts. I created this podcast to help you expand your subconscious limiting beliefs about the potential of deserving the manifestations you're calling in. Therefore, you're tuning into this podcast series to show your subconscious that anything you desire is possible. And by pressing play, you've already started the process of manifesting it. Welcome back to another process episode, which is where we showcase one of our pathway members who have gone on to manifest something extraordinary or big within their life, may it be career, home, relationship, financial. This has become one of your favorite podcast segments that we have, as we can tell by the numbers. And one commonality that I want to make that you'll begin to recognize each of these pathway members share in common from past episodes to new is that not one of them simply dipped their feet into the work or flirted with it. They went all in. I've been able to see this recently with my dad who's doing the work. They sort of touch in, don't really do the DIs, do it once in a while, skip around the workshops without finishing them. Whereas what you'll listen to with each of these episodes, these are the people that started with how to manifest, moved into shadow, moved into inner child, did all of the workshops, listened to every one of the supported classes, which is our once a month class where Jessica and I go through in the pathway answering members' questions. And then they've gone on to listen to every podcast episode. That's what you will hear from each of the pathway members that we share on this. And not because we're only picking people who do that, the ones who actually manifest the big things, they go all in. And not only that, but once they've gone through the work, and they get a baseline of it, they make it their own. So a past guest, Heather Whitaker, you heard that in the Deep Imaginings, she started out with them, listening to them, and they weren't as effective to her. So she figured out her own process that when she walks on hikes, she talks the prompts aloud. So she'll listen to them in her earbuds. Once she's heard the prompts, she then goes and talks out what's been prompted until she gets to the block, and then she reprograms it. And you have to imagine, even as you're walking and listening, you're in a hypnotic state because your brain, your conscious mind isn't flying around. You've now gone into an alpha or a theta. So that's what you'll also find in commonality with these members. They make it their own. They don't stop when they get a roadblock. They actually figure out their own way through it. Today will be no exception. So I'm going to kick it over to my co-host, Jessica Gill, who you've heard on the Explained episodes and the Process episodes, as she highlights another really exciting member within the pathway and how they've gone on to manifest something extraordinary.
Hello, everyone. Welcome back to another episode of The Process. Jessica here. I am so thrilled today because we are having Atarah Valentine, one of our TBM coaches, take over as co-host of this Process episode. It's so full circle because I was able to interview Atarah for his Process episode, and now through all of the work he's done, he's gone on to train with us as a TBM coach and start taking clients. Lots of clients, and his insight is just so poignant and so in depth, and I love the perspective that he offers. So I know you guys will get so much from this episode, and without further ado, I'll pass it over to Atarah and Victoria. Enjoy.
Hi, I'm Atarah Valentine. I'm one of the coaches here at To Be Magnetic, and I am so excited to be taking over the podcast today for this process episode. Today's guest is Victoria Jane. When her submission form was sent through, I knew she was the person I wanted to connect with. In this episode, she shares her story of growing up in the United States with immigrant parents, the pressure she felt to live her life in a way that felt so different from her peer group, and ultimately how she stepped into her authenticity and made a huge career change after years of living her life based on her childhood programming. We really go into detail about all of the aspects of manifestation and the emotion and energetics behind her personal process. This is the expanded podcast, The Process with Victoria Jane. Welcome back to another episode of the expanded podcast, The Process. I am so excited to be hosting this episode with guest Victoria Jane. And let's just start right at the beginning. Can you share your cultural upbringing and background?
Yeah, so I grew up in California. I'm still here. And my cultural background is Chinese American. So my parents came to the US from, they grew up in Taiwan, and they came in the 70s for grad school. And then, but my grandparents and ancestors are from China. So went through a lot of trauma around, war and fleeing the country and all that. And they ended up here. And I've spent my upbringing growing up in a pretty, I don't want to say like super conservative, but just like your typical white suburb, where I was one of, a very few number of Asian kids.
And what was that like for you? That's in sessions lately. This has been coming up a lot with people who are doing this work who do have immigrant parents, and how when they came over, they kind of felt like they weren't allowed to be either thing, right? They couldn't connect fully to the American culture, and they couldn't connect fully to, in your case, the Chinese culture. And it kind of left them feeling like an outsider on both fronts. So how did that affect you growing up?
Yeah, I think growing up, I don't even know if I was aware of it, because it's just like the water you swim in, right? And it's interesting because I'm kind of jumping ahead a little bit, but Reparent was the first workshop I ever did within the TBM suite. And it was really, it's been something that I've had to unpack, and especially in the last, call it like 4-ish years, because growing up, I just tried to fit in and like act white, right? And so it was almost like I had to, there were like multiple me's. There was the me that, on Saturdays went to Chinese school and hung out with my grandparents. And it was like completely, I was speaking Mandarin, and the food we ate at home was like all Chinese food. But then I would go to school, and there is this, I think it's interesting to talk about this now, kind of with how much people are also examining their own biases. But I would go to school, and then it would be like, I'd want to bring like a Lunchable and just like trying to totally fit in. And so I internalized a lot of like what was held as the standard as good, which we know now is like white bodies and, a very specific definition of American culture. So with this kind of experience where, again, white suburb, most of what I saw was like, oh, being Asian American, especially like in media, it's like a few different tropes, right? It's like the really kind of like painfully awkward, like nerd, or someone who's just like a total like fresh immigrant. And so one word that was really triggering to me was the word fob.
And can you just say, just in case people don't know what that means?
Yeah, so it's an acronym for fresh off the boat. But it's said, certainly in a derogatory way, where it's like, you're such an outsider, you don't know like how things work. And so like the specific association that I had internalized, and like I had associated all these negative qualities to the word, obviously, because it was used in a negative way. And it was interesting because this came up when I did shadow later on, and I didn't really know like what to do with it. For a while I was like, oh, should I like try to desensitize myself to this? And I was really confused. And it's actually really like, part of me is like, gosh, I'm embarrassed to admit that I didn't realize at the time that a racial slur isn't shadow. I feel like that's like important to say or acknowledge. And so it's just been a lot of education kind of along the way of like reading Asian American authors. There's a great book by a Nobel Prize winning Filipino American journalist called Little Big Man. And he writes about like the male versus female Asian American experience. And then also something that Shaman Durek wrote in his book was really helpful. And I'm like, not going to quote it perfectly, but he talks about how you can love your ethnicity without ascribing to the qualities that society or the system has put on it. So it's like we might think of, all these things associated with FOB, but like that has nothing to do with actually being Asian, right? Or in his case, he was talking about being Black. And so just like these little pieces along the way really helped me redefine what my race meant to me.
That's amazing. And I want to really, really dig into this because I think this is so important for people, like for people to understand who don't deal with this issue, but also for people who are currently dealing with this, because it is such a theme that everybody is experiencing in some way, shape, or form now. And the more education we have from hearing the way that you overcame things and how things affected you is just the better for everybody as a whole. But before we move on, so I know you're a projector in human design, and I'm sure this was a huge thing to look back at your life through the lens as a child to be like, oh, I really understood what was right versus what my parents were telling me or versus how I was treated or like the structures that were put around you. What was that like for you?
Yeah. Okay. So I also feel like it's important to say within like the term Asian American, there's like so many different experiences. So I want to like kind of acknowledge that I have a very specific flavor of it, but this is like, there's lots of others. For me, my parents came from grad school and there was like a lot of focus on academics. And also I think the culture of like work ethic that they had been brought up in, it's a country of like hustlers, right? It's like people had to flee war and like, it was all about survival. And so I had a lot of pressure to succeed academically growing up. And you mentioned, yes, I'm a projector. Both of my parents don't know their specific birth times, but I'm pretty sure my mom is a generator, my dad's a projector for various reasons. But I was raised to live like a generator. We'll get into this more too, but like I was always, just felt like I had to always be doing that. I always needed to prove to others and myself in some way that I was like doing okay. And that's like classic projector as well, like wanting to be seen, wanting to be successful. And that was like another big part of my journey and my process with this work is recognizing, oh, wow, I put a lot of value in being seen as, for me, like the shadow word that it worked a lot with was dumb, because it was just so unsafe to not know the answer, to not be smart. And so that was like a really big thing.
Yeah. And well, especially because, from your perspective, you see the way that the structure is around you and you know what you have to do to succeed in it, but you also know it's not in alignment with you, right? And you're being rewarded and seen for what you're doing and not actually who you are.
Yeah. It took me a while though. I'm speaking from my perspective as a projector. I think it can happen to anyone, but for me, the way I naturally wanted to be, which was like more time, like chilling out, like watching TV or whatever, right? Which wasn't okay. Like I would learn and observe like what rules I needed to follow to like make the right choice or to survive, right? So all of a sudden I was thinking about how to make my decisions and navigate life versus feeling it. And it took a long time to realize like, oh, what I feel is actually valid and that can be a legitimate way to like move through life.
It's similarly like when people are raised culturally like this, but also when people are just trying to find their role within their family, like we all fall into different things, right? There's the person who receives attention by being rebellious. There's the person who just shuts down completely so that they're almost not seen because they've seen someone else get in trouble. And then there's the person who just kind of slits within the middle and they start doing things and acts of service. And that's where their value comes from. Then it becomes so much harder later when you're trying to get in alignment with yourself because you really have to do so much unblocking to uncover who you actually are and what actually lights you up.
Totally. Yeah. And I'm sure you can relate as a reflector.
Yes. Well, as a reflector who grew up in like kind of similar circumstances to you, just painted with a different brush, which is why I'm so excited to be having this conversation with you. But so let's talk about what brought you into this work to begin with. And if you'd like to share your astrological sign too, if that's your thing, like feel free.
Yeah, well, I'll share it because I'm sure other people want to know. I haven't like gone too deep with it, but I'm a Libra sun, Sag rising, and Cap moon.
It's funny that I picked you because all the women around me are Libras for some reason.
Oh, interesting. There must be a thing there.
Yeah. So where were you in your life And what decision made you start doing this work?
Yeah, it's so funny because I definitely feel like there was an intuitive sparkle of magic that led me to Lacey, because it came to me like through multiple sort of like avenues. And like the third time I had heard about Lacey back in the day, I was like, okay, I need to pay attention, because the first couple of times I remember going to the website and being like, not really sure what this is about. And then the third time it came through was when I heard Lacey on Luke Story's podcast, and she was just talking about manifesting, and like, I don't even remember exactly what it was, but something about her, I was like, she sounds really cool. Like, I need to figure out what this is all about. Because it was just like calling things in, and like, who doesn't want that, right? I'm sure everyone listening is like, I have things I want to manifest. So I had heard that episode, and then I think the Reparent workshop had just come out, and I was in corporate. I was working in tech and like business and strategy roles for the last 10 years. And so my work schedule for the most of my life has always been pretty crazy. And so I was like, okay, Thanksgiving's coming up. I'm going to buy Reparent, and I'm going to do it all on my Thanksgiving break.
That's amazing. And was that your entry level? So you jumped into Reparent at the time, Unblocked Inner Child now, like as your first thing.
Yeah, I don't even think, I think maybe Shadow had been out, and that was it. Like the formula wasn't out yet at that point. But it was like, obviously, like for anyone listening, I would not recommend just sitting down and trying to like bang out Reparent in like 4 days, because I did like two like days or 2 sessions a day. And then by the end of it, saw all my family, and like was very tender, kind of grouchy, but it was really pivotal. So.
Of course, because, it's every time, and I've done Inner Child now probably 7 or 8 times, and every single time I'm around my family, I do it again, because I'm like, you think you've resolved everything, but then as soon as you're in that environment, things come back and you're like, ooh, what's that? That's new. And you want to get to the bottom of it. So I actually think it's awesome that you completely just dove in.
I didn't know what I was setting up for, though.
But it's good. You've kind of stayed pretty consistent with that amount of determination in your process of doing this work. So I think that's so awesome. And so let's talk about what kind of came off of that. Like, if you didn't do your list at that point, like kind of what shifts, what kind of self-reflection did you have? What things did you figure out during that time?
Yeah. So like I said, I just did the workshop thinking like, oh, maybe something like I'll get some of that sparkly magic without really wanting to manifest anything. And I've always kind of been into, personal growth and that sort of thing. So I had worked with healers before, and like done yoga training, and like had my own practice. So I thought I was like aware of my trauma and upbringing and all that. But doing Reparent in such a condensed way really just shone this light on like all the things that I hadn't really thought about in aggregate. And so it was just helpful to be like, oh, like here's like the entire, from birth till now, like all the things that are still active and alive for you in this moment now in some way. And it was really healing to go back and work with different sets of magnetic parents to get things that I needed, but just that wasn't available at the time. So I've had so many different magnetic parents. I've had like therapists or like other, people who I really admire, like Bruce Lipton or Gabor Mate. And that was kind of like phase 1, because I think as we were talking about my upbringing, like in my mind, I was like, oh, white parents are so like affectionate and like outwardly, these outward displays. And they always say you're doing a great job even when you don't, which was like a big thing, right? Because for me, it was like anything less than a 95 was like, this isn't really up to par, So like I had to go and like, that was the first layer, but like you're saying, there's always more. And so I've done Reparent a number of times at this point, and that was what my first round looked like, but over time it shifted, and I brought in magnetic parents that were Asian American or just Asian. And that was really helpful, because I actually, in the beginning, I even had a hard time imagining what that would look like. And so it's just so interesting for me to look back on the evolution of my inner child journey, the growth and like the full set of magnetic parents that I've had.
Amazing. And the thing is, that's really interesting, because it's kind of what we were talking about, where it's like you didn't even realize that was a block for you.
Mm-mm.
Even though you're a completely intelligent, aware human being, it's like then you go into that and you're like, wow, I have a huge block, even with imagining Asian parents who are going to support me in this situation. And I love that you had multiple sets of magnetic parents. And I'd love for you to kind of just talk about that and why you chose them, because I think a lot of people who are doing this work feel guilt around not being able to use their parents the first time through. And so many of us just can't. I could not use either of my parents for, probably the first 4 or 5 times that I did it. So I'd like Bob Saget because he was like the dad on Full House.
Yeah.
And like,
you're like, I can definitly work with that, right?
Yeah, totally. And I'm like, that's the dad to me. DJ and like the twins and Stephanie seem so happy. So what drew you to the magnetic parents that you chose that first round?
Yeah. And I do want to say, yes, I'm thinking about all the people who are in this position of like, oh, but I should want to use my parents, or feeling bad. And like, it's not about blame in any way. It's just about like me or you as the person like going through the workshop. And so first of all, like for me, it wasn't believable that my parents could be my magnetic parents. Like it just wasn't believable. So that's like kind of, I think, the starting point. And maybe now I could kind of take that through. But at the time I knew that like I wanted some of those qualities that I described earlier. And so the people that came to mind were, there's a couple people who have kids on Instagram, like they're like cool young moms. I'm like, oh, that would be fun, right? Artistic and make like organic baby food and just like so different.
What qualities were you seeking that like made you choose multiple sets of different magnetic parents in this process?
So in the beginning, it was just being sort of like not as focused on academics, nurturing whatever it is that I wanted to do or be. I'll just share a quick story. Like the focus on academics, just to paint the picture, was like so strong for me. There's this story that my mom tells about me being a little kid. Like I don't remember the incident myself. And I was trying to figure out like what I could be when I grew up. I was like running careers by her. I was like, oh, so can I be like a teacher? Do they have to go to college? Because like I knew that I had to go to college. That was expected. And she's like, yeah, you can be a teacher. And I was like, cool. So like, does whatever, like a doctor go to college? And then I'm like, does a clown go to college? And she's like, no. I was like, oh, so I can't be a clown.
But that's not completely true because they do have clown college.
Do they?
Yeah.
Okay, well,
now they do. So you could.
My mom didn't know that.
Maybe that's your authentic path. Maybe that's like what we're really going to uncover today.
Yeah. So anyway, so that was kind of the first bit. After doing Reparent that first time, after I kind of got that first dose of like what my like deep 5-year-old wanted, I've been able to work with additional sets of magnetic parents. So I've found that like then it became believable to find Asian American magnetic parents like Jimmy Chin, who's this like outdoor adventure dude and a filmmaker and Asian American. Just to know that that exists, I was like, oh, maybe I can do something in my career that has like a bigger element of passion or just like different from kind of this really predictable path.
Right. And he was your magnetic parent, but in turn also became an expander for you.
Yeah, actually, that's a good point. I hadn't thought about it that way. Yeah.
Yeah. And so off of going in and doing this inner child work, where did you step to next within the work?
From there, I went to Shadow. And I think in between these two workshops, the formula on like how to manifest had come out at that point. And so I was like, oh, I'll just mess around with this. And so I had put some like material things on the list. It was like just clothes or jewelry or whatever. But one material thing I manifested that's like such a joke with some other members of my local like TBM chapter is manifesting a juicer. Like no joke, 4 of us have manifested juicers because like at the time, I mean, maybe it still is trendy to like celery juice or whatever. And I was like, man, I don't think I'm really going to commit to this, but I'd like to just try it. I manifested a free juicer.
It's like the starter manifestation.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah. So then I was like, okay, this is starting to make sense. And then I went to Shadow, and this is where a lot of heavy lifting happened because like the shadow word of, I don't want to say my life, but like up until this point was dumb because it was so unsafe for me to not know the answer to something, to be like academically mediocre, the sheer panic of like not knowing the answer to something and all of the catastrophic consequences that would come from like doing poorly on something. It was just like so deep in my nervous system. I joke with some of my close friends and partner, like I have a lot of math trauma. It was showing up in life even like at the end of last year still. I took dumb through Shadow and that unlocked a lot for me in my career.
And what was coming up for you? Like, how did you navigate through those feelings? Because I love, personally, inner child and shadow to me are just, they're the most important things to manifest and to actually manifest at the level that you want to. And so many people go through just kind of ticking the box of doing the workshop. And then they're like, okay, now my big manifestation is going to come through. And that's not really how it happens.
I feel like you kind of like feel like shit a little bit before like you can manifest something good. Like if you're really getting in there with reparent and shadow, well, I'll just speak for myself. That's how I felt.
No, I had the same experience. Like, I mean, I literally cried on my floor for like 6 months, but like, I loved it.
Yeah.
But so for you, like taking the word dumb, like, how did you navigate that through the work, like through that workshop in particular?
Yeah. Well, it's funny because like, you know, one of the earlier days in the workshop, you are supposed to ask people what they don't like about you, right? To get ideas for shadow. And it's really funny because nothing anyone else said was actually my shadow. So I do want to just like mention that because I also have a couple friends that have done the workshop and like it was similar for them where the actual shadow is sometimes not what people see in you. So I came to Dem. I was like, oh yeah, I looked around at like how I was showing up at work and kind of always feeling like I hadn't done quite enough to be safe, to be like accepted. And then as I took it through, like I think it was a lot of reimagining what it would have been like to make a mistake, to not have to push so hard, that the felt experience of knowing I am whole and complete without needing to like know anything.
Definitely. Just to be as you are.
Yeah.
And I think something that's worth mentioning that you said is that when you send the list out, and this is such a huge thing for people, when you get your words back, right? Your list of words, your shadow words, how you're make people feel, where you're not standing up for yourself, all of these things, a lot of times they feel like they fall flat. And a lot of what people are commenting on isn't the actual shadow. It's how your shadow materializes. It's the things that you do to keep your shadow hidden. So for me, it was like, oh, you're controlling and you're bossy and you're overbearing. And for me, I was those things. So people didn't see that I was actually the opposite deep down. So I think that's worth for people who might be struggling with that. All of those things might just be how your shadow is manifesting itself in your personality. It might not actually be what your shadow words are.
Yeah, that's a great point.
Yeah. So from there, then what happened? When did you like circle back in and like really make your list? Were you manifesting at this point?
Yes. So at this point, when I was doing shadow, I knew, so work wasn't great. And simultaneously, I was having some health issues come up, hormonal imbalance, blood sugar stuff, and just like overall stress from being low grade burnt out. And so I knew I needed to make a change. When I was actively working through shadow, I was like, maybe I'll like try to manifest a new job and like be really deliberate about it. So first, as I was working through the workshop, I got a random bonus. So this is like how I knew I was on the right track. The company that I worked for at the time didn't do like regular bonuses. This was like a one-off, totally random thing. And it wasn't for a huge amount. It was $800 or something. And I got it. But then randomly, I got this like completely unexpected parking ticket for the exact amount as well, which is, by the way, a very expensive parking ticket that I shouldn't have ever gotten. But it was just like the energetics of that completely proved to me like, oh, this is real. And then from there, once I had completed shadow, I was like, okay, I felt that I was like showing up at work a little bit differently, where I wasn't quite as seeking validation. And then when I was ready to make the leap, I manifested my new job in 2 weeks.
Wow.
From conversation to offer with a 30% raise. So,
you know, what's amazing about what you're saying is like, even with the parking ticket, sometimes people will say, well, how do I know if something's a test? How do I know? Right. And things don't come in one form. For you, that was such an obvious test, and not all tests have to be so black and white and clear on what they are, but you literally just went through, you did all this inner child work, you did this shadow work, got into alignment, upped your self-worth, got this bonus, and you're like, oh, I'm awesome. I just got this bonus. And then you walk outside and there's a ticket on your car. And I always think it's so funny because it's almost like the universe's way of saying like, oh, you think you're awesome? How do you feel now after I give you this ticket? To see if your self-worth, it's almost like a test for your self-worth, to see if your self-worth can still stay where you've worked to put it, because that's usually when people fall apart, when they're doing the work. And the work, don't get me wrong, can be so difficult and so hard to look at, but it's when they kind of self-expand in that way and their self-worth gets larger and bigger. And then something like this happens and so many people go back to square one in that situation. And it's amazing because you were just like, ooh, I'm close. And then your job came through 2 weeks later.
Yeah. I mean, the only reason why I thought like, ooh, I'm close though, is because I had been steeped in, I can't remember like where Lacey says this, but whether it's supported or the podcast or whatever, when these like halfway manifestations come through, it's a good thing, not a bad thing. So rather than feeling like, oh no, like this got taken away, it was like, hey, look, you can do this, but it's not locked in yet. Keep going.
Definitely. I think that's a great piece of advice.
So I'm quickly interrupting this episode to invite you, if you're ready to start your manifestation journey, or if anything you've heard in our manifestation episodes has piqued your interest to begin. We have a la carte workshops in everything from the basics bundle, which is what we recommend to everyone who starts. It's the formula that actually teaches you how to manifest, unblocked inner child, and unblocked shadow. We also have a la carte workshops on love and money. But the real gem is the Pathway membership because it encompasses every single workshop we have. It's a year-long membership with full access to the few a la carte offerings we have and exclusive workshops not available anywhere else, such as the daily practice, which is what everybody in the Pathway uses, hopefully at least 3 times a week to daily, in order to truly create the new neural pathways that one needs in order to manifest, and houses the library of our deep imaginings, which is our unique hypnosis process that allows you to get into your subconscious and overwrite those old neural pathways, creating the new ones. You can use our special code, EXPANDED, all caps, EXPANDED, to receive $20 off your first a la carte workshop purchase or $20 off your first month of the Pathway. Again, that's all caps, EXPANDED, EXPANDED. Okay, now back to the episode.
So take me from there. Like, did you hop into another workshop from here? You started your new job. Did any tests come up around that?
Yeah. So definitely like huge test when I had got the offer for this new job. My former manager was like, please stay, and like made it like a competing offer, wanted me to like sit down and meet with management and just like be really sure. There were like multiple sessions of crying and being like, I don't know. But there was a deeper part of me that did know though, too, on the other hand. So that happened. And then I started my new job, but it was still within the tech industry that I was in. And so it was both an expansion and kind of like, okay, cool. I've stripped away this first layer of dumb shadow, but I still felt compelled to stay for whatever reason. I just like didn't realize that I could really leave because we haven't gotten into this too much, but that lifestyle and that whole corporate track just like wasn't the right fit for me as a projector, but I still needed to be there to see and feel that I could be successful, valued.
And also in the way that you were told was important your whole life.
Yeah. And so the key difference was in this new job, I was there doing the same thing, but I didn't have the dumb shadow, and to feel what that felt like, that new level of freedom while still playing the old game. But because of that, I got super burnt out. And so there was a whole nother set of manifestations. I took some time off of work. So in the new job, I had some paid time off to heal some of these issues. In the process, I manifested a trip because I was living in San Francisco in the city at the time, and I wanted to get out of the city. So I manifested like a 10-day trip for, I think, like less than $300, and then a new home because I wanted to move out of the city.
And you're a non-specific manifester.
Yes.
So when you're sitting to do this new list, like what does that look like for you?
Yeah. So for me, it was interesting to learn I was a non-specific because I've always been good at like making lists and making plans. And so a lot of what has helped me work with that, but not feel held back by it, is this idea that whatever comes through for me. I don't have to know how it's going to come through. And the thing that comes through can be totally different from what I actually wrote down. And that's fine. With the home, I have a partner and he's a specific manifester. So it's interesting because we made a really detailed list because that's kind of what he needs. But things were not coming through for a long time. And there was definitely a magic dark with calling in a new home, where we actually moved from our old place into a second place that wasn't a fit. And then we moved again. So we moved twice in 3 months. And the reason why that was is because for me as a non-specific, I had an idea of where I wanted to live and all of that, but I hadn't really been able to feel it. And I'd thought about how I wanted to feel. I want to feel so joyful and relaxed and grounded, but like I hadn't actually felt it. And so the thing that actually made a change was going to the forest retreat house with a group of friends. And while I was there, feeling in my body like, oh, this is what it's like to be so comfortable, and that like feeling of worthiness of a home that I really enjoy. And so after that experience of really feeling it, something clicked and we manifested our home like within a month after that.
Wow, amazing. What did that magic dark process feel like for you? Because so many people are confused. People who are even starting the work will say, oh, I'm in a magic dark, but they haven't actually even had a micro manifestation. They haven't really properly begun the work. And so the magic dark in me, the way it always shows up is when I'm in some kind of a flow and I'm starting to have bigger manifestations come through. And then all of a sudden it's like crickets, nothing's moving. People don't respond to my emails, right? Mm-hmm. And I just feel like, okay. And it's really the time you either crumble or you push forward. So what was it like for you?
So, okay, specifically for housing, starting in the beginning of 2018, when I was kind of in a rut, we actually had, in the original place we lived in, we had some like awful neighbors move in that, I don't want to be mean, but they made a lot of noise, and like they had moved from, no offense to people who come from New York, but they were just used to like staying up and like partying all the time. And we had lived there for 4 years with 2 sets of neighbors. One had a baby and a dog, never had any issues, but these new neighbors came and we couldn't really figure out a way to like reconcile our different schedules because I don't party all the time. And so from that, we needed to move, and we had been looking, but things weren't really happening. Then we found a place. And so this is the place we lived in for less than 3 months, and the rock bottom, because we moved. We thought it was perfect. Like on paper, it looked great, everything we wanted. And finding a place in San Francisco is hard too. It was like the right amount of space, the right price. There was a backyard. There was a driveway, which was important for my partner because he has the van. And then we move in, and there are crazy neighbors again with a dog that is always barking, and then a church across the street that rang their bells every hour from 6 a.m. to 10 p.m. every single day.
Fun. Yeah.
I know. And so that was the rock bottom, actually, where it was just so not really sustainable to live there.
And did it like emotionally unravel you?
Oh, yeah. Yeah. Because I mean, at this point, I was in my full burnout from work. I wasn't really able to sleep because, I mean, I know 10 p.m. to 6 a.m. like is technically 8 hours, but you know, it takes some time to wind down. And then I would also have insomnia. So then I'd be panicked because I'd be like, I can't sleep in the next day because this is like constantly going on. So I was, yes, emotionally unraveled is a fair way to put it.
Yeah. And because it's like you're just expecting this cycle and you know the timing of the cycle and that the bell is going to go off. And yeah, it just becomes this very stressful thing.
And it was just so bizarre too, you know, because it's like not a normal thing. I feel like most churches don't always do that. So that had happened. And so I guess the magic dark was being in that unraveled state and being like, okay, something's got to change. And I was doing the work. I'm like sitting here, I'm like imagining the place. I'm like, I think I'm expanded. I think I'm unblocked. What's happening? And it was just hanging in there, I guess, for a little bit.
Yeah. And so I want to kind of go on that because one thing that I really appreciate just in your intake form is the way that you use expanders. And I think it's going to be very expanding for other people because there's so much confusion about where expanders play a role. I'd love to talk about who some of your expanders were, what situations they helped in, what kind of transition from leaving your job and being in this housing situation. What workshops did you fall in? What expanders were you looking for to kind of go to your next place?
So for housing, I know people that had also moved into a similar neighborhood and that sort of thing. I didn't have a ton of expanders there because I feel like that I had a couple expanders in real life. For work, it was very thematic. So what I have found is life will bring me expanders in kind of like whatever is on my mind at the moment. So for example, when I left my job at the beginning of this year in 2020, I wanted to find people working in wellness that were Asian. And so I have a whole grouping of people there, or people who are able to just like do their own thing, whether that's like podcasters or whatever. And so I actually throw all of my expanders in a Google Doc grouped by these themes, because I find I can only hold like, I don't know, 4 to 6 people in my head at a time. But now at this point, after having done the work for a few years, I have this long doc. It's like 12 pages of all the expanders that I've ever had. And looking back at it, sometimes I'm like, oh my gosh, there's so much that's possible. And it just kind of, it's like a nice thing that keeps me motivated.
First of all, I think that's absolutely amazing because it's so hard for us to find full expanders. I've very successfully found so many fragment expanders. And similarly, like sometimes I'll pull like 15 different people and I'll completely immerse myself in everything around them. If it's a creative interest, if it's a relationship, like I'll just really sink in and observe and learn and listen. And how did you utilize your expanders to help you kind of transition to your next work situation?
So this was really scary for me because going back to like, just like how I was raised, it's expected that you follow this track, right? Of like, you go to school and then you get this kind of job in one of like 3 or 4 industries. And then you just like keep doing it. And I also went to grad school too. So it's like everybody that I knew was in business more or less in some way. And even though I was so sick for a while and I knew I had to make a change, it was still terrifying to be like, wait, I can really do this. I can like leave corporate, I can leave tech. And it wasn't until I took this break from work to heal a little bit. And I was planning to go back, and I did go back for a while. But that was the moment where things changed for me, when I had taken the action of, oh, I can like step off for a moment, and then feeling like I stepped off and the world didn't end. And so in terms of expanders, I mentioned like a lot of different podcasters. I'm sure folks know like Katie Dalebow, and then Jenna Zoe as a projector running her own business. There's a woman named Mimi Young, and she's a Taiwanese Canadian shaman that makes like these like shamanic skincare products. So those are some people. I obviously have more in this 12-page doc, but just being able to think about these people and then being like, okay, they did it and I can do it too, as like these little touchstones. I'll also add that to get to even this point of being able to say, here's this expander, if they did it, I can too. That was a journey, because I definitely didn't think that way when I started the workshops. I would see all these people doing things and be like, oh, they're special, they're different in some way.
And so how did you kind of integrate those into your daily life? Was it you followed them on Instagram? Did you watch interviews? Did you read books?
All of that.
All of it.
All of it. And I guess, because I'm trying to think, was there a specific point that I remember where that changed? It wasn't this sudden thing. It was just the ongoing practice of immersing myself in seeing this over and over, like this is possible, until finally my brain had to be like, fine, I guess it's true.
Totally. And honestly, that's what happens. It's a cumulative. And I think one thing that's so important to stress, and there's 2 different sides to this coin. You said all of this started changing when I literally just decided to do nothing. And I think that's one of the magics of a magic dark, is that for people who received programming growing up that like, you have to do this and you have to work hard and this is what your career path looks like and this is how you become successful and you need to be burnt out and you need to act like a generator, even though this wasn't the terminology your parents used. Yeah. Act like a generator even though you're a projector. When you're in your magic dark, that's when all of that programming can creep back in and you feel like, oh, I have to do something. I have to take action. Like this is going wrong. So it's amazing that you resisted that, because that was probably the biggest test that you had to pass. And then in turn, you received all this clarity. Versus the other end of that is with people who feel too timid or feel like they haven't had a voice and haven't fully discovered who they are yet. They sometimes need to do the opposite, and they need to create actionable steps that they can do during that time. So it's almost like for different people, does that make sense? Like,
Yeah.
So for you, not doing nothing was perfect because that's how you're showing your trust muscle strong. You know things are coming, and you spent that time doing a lot for yourself and a lot of internal work.
Yeah. Well, and I will say, this is why rock bottoms are great, though, because I wouldn't have had the strength to just sit there and do nothing if I hadn't been so burnt out and so sick. I would have kept trying to do something. And so the rock bottom was a gift, but it's also like the magnetism that comes from a rock bottom can be so much stronger than just doing it, quote unquote, like right the first time around, because the level of knowing in my body now of like, okay, I can't do this, was just so much more significant.
Definitely. And after we experienced that a few times, I think with both of us similarly, I had so many rock bottoms between my manifestations. And I was just brought back to that place. But I had so much work around my self-worth and my like relationship with myself that needed to come into alignment before I could pull anything in. It literally took me being thrown on the ground after thinking I was advancing to really believe that I was done, because it just made me sick of it. The goal is, as this continues, that you don't have to be pushed to that place, and you can set your boundaries in place, like in your process, so that you can get to your next move in a healthier way. Right?
Exactly. Yeah, I'm hoping that's where I am in my chapter of life now. I'm a 6'2" as well in human design. So it's like I've wrapped up the like first 30 years of trial and error. I'm like, okay, maybe I don't need to rock bottom as much anymore. But I'm so grateful for the ones that I've had.
Definitely. And it's also just being able to look like one thing that's been really great. And the thread that I really see in your story is that you've taken everything that could have been a negative and could have really broken somebody down, and you've turned it into really strong things. And you didn't reject the aspects of yourself that were being pushed on you by your parents, because you're still being very organized and very meticulous in the way that you do things, but you're using them in a healthy way for yourself. And so many times people take these shadow aspects and they just completely reject them. And then so in turn, they'll be completely unorganized. They won't try. It's like you were able to understand the gift through the negativity and the way that you were raised and reclaim it for yourself, to use it to empower yourself. And you were also able to take the lack and figure out how to build yourself up so you can really step into what you are doing now.
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely still a practice, but I love what you said, which is like, we have to know how to inhabit both ends of the spectrum of whatever like duality that we're looking at, whether that's like being super organized or like surrendering and going with the flow. Neither one is where we're supposed to be living all the time. It's like somewhere in the middle.
And sometimes you need to do more in one situation and more in another situation. And it's understanding like there isn't actually good or bad. It's just finding the right measurement in the right situation. So let's talk into your whole career transition. So what came off of this like amazing Magic Dark that you went through?
Okay, so I was in the Magic Dark. Like I said, I had taken some time off, and then I had gone back to my corporate job. And once I went back, I was like, oh my gosh, now I can feel how out of alignment it is. And I took some time, but after, like I said, that turning point of like, oh, I can step off and like the world doesn't end, I made the decision to leave at the end of January of this year. And the timing of it is just so funny because I had like, a month and a half of being at home, trying to heal my body, starting like my own business essentially around human design. Another big piece of what gave me the permission to make all of these changes that we've talked about now is the vision that human design painted of, hey, things can just be in flow for you as a projector. Your way of living doesn't have to be 60-hour work weeks and going all the time. Your work can be being a guide, and that can just be a few hours, and the rest of your time you're just strengthening your container and like getting enough sleep and all of this stuff. And so I had started doing that, and it's just so interesting, I think, the timing of COVID and everything, because all of a sudden I saw everyone around me also slowing down to like my pace. And I mean, it feels surreal now because it's been maybe like 4 or 5 months, but I'm just so in awe of what I get to be able to do of sharing human design with people.
Which is really such an amazing gift.
Thank you. And so in terms of like how that's feeling right now, the thing that I want to say is I remember years ago doing this work and hearing Lacey say like, oh, once you make the career transition, you will be surrounded by a whole new cast of people that will be your expanders, a whole new network, right? And I like knew kind of logically that would happen, but now to be living it and being like, oh, I know all these amazing, coaches and nutritionists and other women that are sharing their healing gifts online. I'm just so grateful and in awe.
It's amazing. And you should be really proud of yourself because you did that.
Thank you.
And one thing I also just want to highlight, because I think it's super important, and I think you're really hitting so much stuff on the head that is going to be so helpful for people, because I think people have a lot of shame around not passing tests, about like having to dip their toe back in like you did with your work. And I think your story is such a good example of, like, as Lacey says, like, run into the fire as many times as you need to until you get burned so bad that you're not going to do it again. And people will fail a test and they'll be like, oh, I've just ruined everything. And none of this is true.
I mean, that's superstition.
Yeah, it's 100% superstition. The thing is, your tests are going to keep being your tests until you actually overcome them. So if you failed a test that came, you didn't actually fail. It just taught you, like, this is where you still have some work to do. And you have the opportunity to, like, focus your attention there and to work on it. And that's exactly what you spent your time doing in your Magic Dark. You went back once you felt a little more at ease and relaxed. And then you were like, nope, but like, I'm over this. So I think you're like a great testament to that. You were in your worth, you were working really hard, you were transitioning a lot, but you still went back to that thing that was familiar. But you needed to do that one more time to really know for yourself that you were just not having it again.
Yeah, that's such a good point. Because there were people in my life at that point when I had gotten that second job offer who were like, don't you want to like take a break? Maybe you should focus on like you. And I was like, no, I'm good. And just because I couldn't see it at the time, like who I was then, my understanding of the world was not what it is now. And so I still had to go through that.
And just a couple more things I want to ask you are, what advice would you have for someone who really, what you did, obviously it's a huge career shift. It was kind of reclaiming all of these aspects of yourself from your childhood, really coming into your own and finding your avenue to use your specific voice. So that's just major self-worth stuff. So what advice would you have for someone who maybe is in the job or the relationship that's not lighting them up, but doesn't feel completely comfortable expressing their voice or doesn't know what to do? What advice would you have for them?
First of all, that time really doesn't play a factor in things. As a recovering like type A person, I'm always like, okay, what next? Like, how do I manifest faster? How do I manifest more efficiently? And it's like, well, looking back at my own journey, there was nothing I could have done to speed it up. The lessons and the expansion happened at the rate at which it was going to happen, and no amount of like efforting would have changed that. So it's like, first is kind of sending out support and patience and just like a big hug to anyone who's in that in between, because I know how uncomfortable it can be. You know, when you have the awareness that you want something to change, but you're not there yet, that's not the most fun place to be. You can reframe it though. And I think that's like, I guess where I want to go to next, which is now that for the person who is in that place, knowing that all these great things are already on your way, like how to surrender more into the moment and just enjoy the alchemy of what's happening to get you there.
Absolutely love that. And just one last question I'd like to ask is, what's the biggest lesson you've personally learned throughout this process? Obviously, the one that you just said was amazing. So that will suffice too. But
no, I think and I think I'm still learning this, is that we're so much more powerful than we realize. Tomorrow, next week, next month, I'll manifest something else that doesn't exist now. And yeah, we're just so much more powerful, I think, than we realize.
I think that's beautiful. And I'm so appreciative of your vulnerability, your tenacity, and your openness. And I know this is going to be so expansive to so many people, and was for me. So thank you for being the first person that I ever got to interview.
Oh, thank you.
For the process.
Yeah, it's been so fun talking to you, and I appreciate all your wonderful questions and just the opportunity to share a little bit.
And I can't wait to continue watching you grow, because I know it's just going to keep going.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for tuning into the episode, and I hope you enjoyed it as much as I did, we did. And in case you're not totally ready to join the pathway yet, I wanted to share a few of our free offerings that I'll often suggest to people as a little bit of a blueprint to get them started on their manifestation journey. The first place I like to direct people completely for free is the motivation. You can see it linked below or on our homepage as our testimony library. And it's categorized by different subjects, whether you're calling in career, money, love, wellness, and much more. When you're reading about a member's experience of what they manifested, you're actually seeing to believe and showing your subconscious that that very thing is possible for you. The second place I like to direct people is to the free clarity exercise, which is also linked below. In it, you get to try our own unique hypnosis process, learn about the science, and some journaling prompts. And the best part about this, you'll get a tiny taste of what it's like to go into your hypnotic state, bring your subconscious forward, and create new neural pathways while receiving clarity. And the third thing, if you haven't listened to it on this podcast yet, please go back to the episode titled Manifestation 101, where you'll learn the basics of neural manifestation to truly understand this process. So go ahead and check out those free resources, the motivation, the free clarity exercise, and the episode Manifestation 101, all linked below. And in an effort to make sure to have representation in this process series, go ahead and submit any process testimonials you have, especially to our LGBTQ+ community, our BIPOC, as well as the Ys, which is anyone in the community who is 45 and over. All right, we'll be back next week.